Hallo und welcome to Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. I'm Manu Feti, Stefan Bienkowski, and Stefan, this is not a transfer show. This is an actual full-on preview show. The Bundesliga campaign is about to kick off in earnest on this weekend, on Friday. Started somewhat with the DFL Super Cup, that is the curtain raiser. The DFB Pokal games, of course, were also on, or are still on, right? Because they go essentially until Monday. We are fully back into actual football being played on the pitch, and that's really exciting. But before we talk about that, how's it going?
Yeah, good. I am honouring the return of the Bundesliga season by also returning to the pitch. I made that rookie mistake of visiting some friends this weekend, and one of them, who organises a weekly kickabout, said they're a man down, and I've been itching to get back into playing. So anyone who doesn't know, I moved out of the city a couple of years ago, and that always means like the lack of opportunities to play football. And as my old friend who's been running this game for like 10 years, I used to play in it every Monday, and he asked me to play, and I was just saying to you before we started recording, I've agreed to play it even though I think there's literally a hurricane heading towards Scotland. I mean, when I say hurricane, it's never as bad as like what our US listeners probably know as a hurricane in Scotland. It just means like 10% more rain. But yeah, it's going to be some truly horrendous conditions to return to football. But I'm doing it because I love this game, and probably for the same reason that most people are listening to this podcast right now.
I just don't get hurt.
No, it's fine. It's five-a-sides, which I think is a very unique British thing. I don't think they have it quite the same in Germany, where it's if I had to describe it, it's honestly like basically like playing football but basketball rules. Where, you know, like a game of basketball with five guys, you have one goalkeeper who's not really a goalkeeper. And it's on like a pitch like the size of a basketball court, if not smaller. So it's not like a full blown 11-a-side game where people are slide tackling and going for headers and things like that. So I'll be fine.
Yeah, in Germany we have those. They have them indoors, but they still have sidelines, right? Like you don't play with like
court. It's outside, but it's in like a cage.
So it's like a hockey thing, like you can play off the boards.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we have those. It's great fun. Also how I blew my ACL, so.
Yeah, well, I actually stopped playing in it 2 years ago because all the guys who played in that game are getting old, and they were just, I couldn't walk off the pitch with somebody kicking me in the ankle or something, but
yeah.
Anyway, we'll see what happens.
Definitely. Anyways, this is what we're actually going to do in this show. We're going to do preview content all week, right? So this is the first one of, what did we say, 3 or 4 podcasts, Stefan?
Yes, 3.
3, yeah. So this is going to be the top 4. And then we're going to do mid-table and then, of course, the relegation, right? So that is sort of the plan. This is the big preview on who we think is going to finish in the top 4. So lots to discuss today, but I'm going to throw it back to you first to bring in some of our listeners.
Yeah, so before we start recording here, we asked our subscribers, our paid subscribers over on Substack in the chat for their predictions for the forthcoming season. So I've asked them to explain who they support and give a brief suggestion of how they think their team will do. And we'll use this throughout the week and all the podcasts, but I'm just going to skim through and give some kind of top 4 predictions for some of these guys, just because that's what we're doing today. Zachary Beach, who's a Bayern fan, thinks Bayern Munich will finish first. I think it'll be extremely competitive. I hope it lives up to that potential. I also believe Bayern can reclaim number 1 place. He's gone for Bayern first, Leverkusen, Leipzig, and Dortmund, top 4. Andy, who's a Leipzig supporter, has gone for Leverkusen, Leipzig, Stuttgart, and Dortmund, with Bayern 5th. Controversial. James Good, who says he's just a general German football fan, but he kind of favours Frankfurt, has gone for Stuttgart first, Leverkusen, Dortmund, Bayern, and then Frankfurt 5th. Dutch Foal, who's, as the name might suggest, a Gladbach fan, has gone for Dortmund first, Leverkusen first, Dortmund second, Leipzig third, Bayern 4th, and he's got Gladbach in 8th. So a typical Gladbach fan, not extremely optimistic. Landon, who I don't know if he says... he's a Stuttgart fan, has gone for Leverkusen first, Bayern second, Stuttgart third, Leipzig 4th. We've got Pratush, who's a Bayern fan, has gone for Bayern first, Leipzig second, Leverkusen third, Dortmund fourth. Brian, who's a Bayern fan, has gone for Leverkusen first, Bayern second, Leipzig third, Dortmund fourth. I'm noticing I'm saying Dortmund fourth a lot in these things. And Nate, who's a Bayern supporter, has gone for Leverkusen first, Leipzig second, Stuttgart third, Bayern fourth. And he says Leverkusen repeat as long as they don't suffer a bunch of injuries. Leipzig move to second as they have some player retention. Stuttgart third as they have had turnover, which could lead to some unexpected draws. And Bayern finishing fourth as they haven't been able to sell enough to do a full rebuild. I should say that thread is wide open, guys. So if you're listening to this and you didn't realize it's there, you can jump in, have a chat with our subscribers, and give us your predictions as well. And obviously let us know who you think could relegated, mid-table, and things like that. But taking from that, Manu, I'm noticing some Bayern fans quite optimistic, but I'm noticing quite a lot of them who think this could be a really difficult season for them.
Yeah, and I think they might be right. I think the rebuild is far from being done. I think there's a lot of work still ahead of them. Cleaning out some of the deadwood, bringing in new players, right, hasn't been as easy as I think a lot of them anticipated. They sold Matthias de Ligt, arguably their best centre-back, although I understand why they did it. I think they had to in order to make room for other signings. They didn't bring in an additional attacking midfielder and then kind of failed to add a piece maybe or have a backup plan. So there's still a lot of, I think a lot of the issues that they had last year, they still have, and then they might have some additional issues, right? I'm not sure Harry Kane still has a 34-game season plus an extended Champions League in his body. I think that is going to be a big problem for them this year. They will have to find additional scoring, where the goal is going to come from when Harry Kane doesn't score goals, right? So I think there's reason for quote unquote pessimism because it's still Bayern Munich. I think they're easily going to finish in the top four, and probably be among the title favorites despite all that. Although interestingly enough, there's a couple of the newspapers and so on have come out and clearly Bayern Munich isn't the favorite to win the league this year. I think that goes once again to Leverkusen. But I share the quote-unquote pessimism. As pessimistic you can be about a club like Bayern Munich that always finishes in the top four, I think I understand why so many Bayern fans are not hot on the season yet.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I spent much this afternoon kind of going through Bayern's squad, looking at the way they played against Ulm in the Pokal, and it's. I think basically the question comes down to, have they improved or have they gone backwards man for man on last season? And, I think there are some very clear examples of, where they have improved. I think Paulinho will obviously be a player that they didn't have, although Pavlovic is obviously kind of hoping to play a bigger role this season, so that, they might be well stocked in that position. You would think Olise would be an improvement on the wing options that Tuchel bemoaned not having last season. And, guys like Musiala and Tittel, you would think 1 year on are getting better and better. But you kind of look at that, and I don't want to just keep harping back to things I write, but I did write that newsletter last week talking about how that defence has been overlooked. And you look at the way they lined up in that first game, and I appreciate that, it's pretty easy going for them against a lower division team. But a back line of Stanisic, Kim, Upamecano, and Guerrero, with Neuer behind them, is fine. But to me, it's no better than last season. And actually, I would say man for man is probably a slight step backwards. I know Guerrero will obviously be replaced by Davies in time. The Stanisic probably won't be the first choice right back, but I don't know. That's my real question as to, I think the real task for Bayern this season, this summer, was to say, right, Leverkusen have set the bar, we have to go out and reach it. And I'm not entirely sure they've done that, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't think this summer spending, and look, there's still another, week and a half, I guess, to go, so they could still do something there. But I don't think I guess one thing is the net positive and net negative over everything. You know, there's definitely examples of some players who've joined the club who'll do much better than the guys they replace. But I'm just not entirely sure the squad as a whole is better enough than it was last season. And then I don't think it's better or good enough to bridge the gap to Leverkusen.
I mean, as you were speaking there about the back line, I think Stanisic coming back is an upgrade for them, right? But then you're quite right. Upamecano and Kim have big years ahead of them where they really have to prove themselves. And Manuel Neuer is getting older. I mean, as we record that, Ilkay Gündogan has just announced that he's retiring from the German national team, right? And you wonder when Neuer is going to be the next one to make that announcement, right? Because it's a lot of games. It's a lot of games, you know, for a goalkeeper at that level who's had significant injuries in his career. And you do wonder. I do think on his day, Neuer is still a top 5 goalkeeper in this world, but on his day is getting frequently harder, right? The older you get, and that is, I think, something that the club will have to realize. You know, he's had performances that were excellent, but still not 100%. Like the Real Madrid game comes to mind, and so you look at that back line and you don't necessarily see improvements. There's the thing with Leon Goretzka still hanging over them too. What they're going to do with him, it looks like they're pushing him out of the club. The way that's being done, I'm of two minds. I understand why Bayern Munich need to move on from him, but at the same time, you know, if this was the other way around, they'd probably be one of the first to bemoan the way it was being done, right? If like a player was all of a sudden asking to leave and pushing for a move away, could you imagine the headlines over that? And now Bayern is essentially doing that to him. But I think that is something that's going to hang over the club and is going to make things increasingly difficult because it's not easy to sell and buy at the moment. Like you look at the transfer window, as you said, it's about 2 weeks, right? September 1st. It feels very congested. Not much movement at all. And so where would you send a player like Goretzka? Like what's even the market for him?
Yeah, it's a tricky one and like I don't want to turn this into like a transfer show,
No.
So but I'll just say that there's an interesting parallel to Chelsea here, and I'm not suggesting by any means that Bayern have been. No, I'm not. Just bear with me for a moment. I don't mean in the sense that Bayern's transfer strategy has been as chaotic or as psychotic as Chelsea's, but what I mean is that in the opening game of the Premier League season, you know, Maresca, the new head coach, had to deal with chants from the home fans for Conor Gallagher, who is, you know, a Chelsea player who the club are basically trying to force out, alongside a whole chorus of other players who are fan favourites and have been kind of sidelined because either the new head coach doesn't want them or because the club realise they have to sell them to kind of balance the books. And it does kind of chime with what's going on at Bayern right now, where you have this new head coach. He's trying to come in. He's trying to kind of lay, you know, his authority down, but there's this constant noise in the background. You know, whether it's you know, Hones talking or Lothar Matthäus arguing with them about inflation for players because one of them keeps talking too much, or you know, Max Abel coming out and saying things about Goretzka, and that's all alongside the clear frustration the club have had in struggling to find buyers for these overpaid superstars. You know, I actually saw Oliver Kahn over the weekend basically did an interview to basically try and clear his name based on, you know, the suggestions that, you know, the club's wage bill went through the roof under him and Salihamidzic. And he made a pretty fair point, I think. He said, look, every decision we made was made by the board and we never went above like 50% wage ratio, which is still well below any other kind of European super clubs. So, and I did kind of look at that and think he's actually got a point in the sense that there's so much of the narrative is based around this idea that Oliver Kahn and Salihamidzic kind of ruined Bayern and left them with these kind of huge expensive albatrosses around their neck in the form of, you know, Kingsley Coman or Leon Goretzka, Joshua Kimmich, Serge Gnabry. But in truth, their wage bill's not really that high compared to most other clubs. They are one of the richest clubs in the world. They do have the financial means to go out and fix this in the summer. They just haven't done that. So, I think you can definitely look back on the Can and Sahabovic era and say, yes, they didn't do enough right, but to continue to use that as an excuse for the club's lack of activity this summer and potentially limiting, Vincent Kompany's ability to really kind of challenge the title this season, I think that's a stretch.
Yeah, and that's fair. So where do we put them in the top 4 then? I don't think they're favored to win the title. That's my I think they're among the favorites, but they're not like the favorite.
Yeah, I would go for third.
Third. Okay. That's interesting.
So you have to give yours as well. Where are you putting them?
Well, yeah, I've been really struggling with my prediction because listeners will know that I went to the DFL Super Cup on Saturday, right? And I went into that game, spending the day with both the Leverkusen and Stuttgart camps and doing a bunch of interviews. There's lots of content coming, so stay tuned, please. But I think watching that Stuttgart-Leverkusen Super Cup game, I mean, holy smoke, Stefan, those two teams can play. I wouldn't sleep on Stuttgart at all. I think that a lot of people thought that there would be a huge drop-off. After I saw them, I know it's the Super Cup and all those add-ons, etc., but it's still such an incredible good side. And they probably have, arguably, like Hoeneß and Alonso are, for me, the two best coaches in the Bundesliga. And I don't know who I put first and second at the moment. There's an argument to be made that Hoeneß is the best coach in German football right now. And that is something that you cannot underestimate. And I also really think that Dortmund have done some incredible good work in this transfer window. I think that is something that, we have to pay attention to. I think that they've done better work at the transfer window than Bayern. And Leipzig looked fantastic in the preseason as well. And they looked great in the German Cup against a difficult Essen side. So I think this is going to be tricky to really predict the top 4. I think Leverkusen are the favorite going in. I think that Bayern are going to push them. But the question is, who else is going to push them? And so there is a good chance that Bayern once again don't finish in the top 2, right? But I think the more difficult question is which one of the other teams are going to finish first and second ahead of them. And that is that's really difficult, I think, to predict this year.
Can I just say, Manu, if you had been a sports journalist, you would have been a great politician because you just waffled there for 10 minutes without answering the question.
But it's hard. It's really hard this year. So, okay, I'm gonna put my prediction out.
Just say Bayern for now. Just say Bayern for now.
No, I'm going to say Dortmund are gonna win the title, and I think Leverkusen are gonna finish second, and then Bayern will finish third.
Wow. So you've got
you wanted a prediction for me. I have a really sneaky feeling about Dortmund.
So you got Dortmund first, Leverkusen second, Bayern third, and Stuttgart fourth.
But where do you put Leipzig?
Where do we put Leipzig? I don't know. It's your prediction. You tell me.
Man. Yeah, this is why I'm wiffle waffling, because a couple of weeks ago, I actually thought Leipzig could also win the title. It's going to be really incredibly open this year. I think that Dortmund have done a lot right. I think that they're flying a little bit under the radar. And so I think this could be a year where they could benefit from Leverkusen maybe having to fight on a couple more fronts. Bayern still struggling with a bunch of problems. And Dortmund have gotten rid of a lot of players that seem to be issues in the dressing room last year, which I think is fascinating. And so, and no one has them on the radar at the moment. Everyone has talked about how great Leipzig is. I saw the stat that, Leipzig always goes into the season as a title contender, but they've never got more than 66 points in a season. And you need, on average, 81 points to win the title, right? So that's 15 points short. They have to get 50 more points this season that they have managed ever in this year, right? So that's I think, a gap that they still need to make up. And so I think
but before we go into Leipzig, let's talk about Dortmund, because you did mention them, and so I do have Dortmund in my top 4, but and I've actually wrote my newsletter on this week, so I'm happy to talk about it. But I want you to maybe back up your claim that you think they'll win the title this season.
I think what they've done, and this is the number one thing that they needed to address, they needed to sign a guy who can score 25 goals for them. Because they hadn't had that last year. Niklas Füllkrug wasn't it, right? He scored 12 goals for them. They didn't have that guy in the squad that could just consistently score a lot of goals for them, which is, I think, also one of the reasons why Terzic was forced into this tactical situation where, he played this defensive-first football. This summer, they signed two guys who I think can score 25 goals for them, in Serhou Guirassy and Maxi Bayer. That is incredible work, considering where they were, right? And it's something that I think no one thought they would possibly be able to do. And I think that goal gap that they made up with that addresses a lot of their problems. And I think also I'm very heavily encouraged by the way Niklas Süle has gone and addressed his physical issues over the summer. He looks fantastic. In Waldemar Anton, they have signed another very strong centre back, right? I think Nico Schlotterbeck at the back end of last season showed his talent. And I think in Pascal Gross, they finally have the midfielder that they need. Someone who can really put it all together. They didn't have that last year either, right? So they essentially, Stefan, they've gone out and addressed all their issues and came up with A+ solutions. And in some cases with 2 A+ solutions. And that is something that I think hasn't been talked enough about. If they can add, they've added potentially 40 goals to their campaign. That is insane. That is insane. And yes, that still has to work and it all has to fit. But not only did they sign 2 guys who can score 25 goals a season potentially, but they also signed the guy who's the second biggest chance creator in the Premier League over the last 10 years after Kevin De Bruyne. I mean, that is incredible good work. And I think that is going to put them in a really strong position.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like Dortmund, unlike Bayern, have actually had a really good window. You're absolutely right. Obviously, signing a really impressive young striker is exciting, but also signing an experienced one in Serhou Guirassy is perhaps even more important for the here and now.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued to see how this all still works. I feel like we still haven't really seen how Sahin's going to put all these pieces together. I watched their cup game in midweek against at the weekend against Lübeck, and I was really struck by just how quickly Pascal Gross has really kind of taken the reins in this team. And he played against alongside Emre Can, sometimes against Emre Can, just because God Almighty, his touches and his ability and close control were remarkably still on show for all to see against a lower league opposition. But the difference between Gross and the difference between Emre Can was just night and day. And, Gross scores the first goal with a cross to the back post where Anton's unmarked, and he sets up, I think, the third goal where it's just this incredible through ball or launched punt up the park, which Julian Brandt gets onto. But and this is partly part of my newsletter this week, in the sense that just having him in that team completely changes the dynamic, because Dortmund are playing a back three with Schlotterbeck, Niklas Süle in the middle, and then Anton on the right. And throughout that game, Gross just kind of stepped back into that back four, and it allowed Schlotterbeck to really kind of bomb down the left hand side. Rierson was kind of playing, it's like a 3-4-3, so Rierson was playing kind of the right wing back. He was able to bomb forward as soon as Pascal Gross came back, and you could tell every time that Gross got the ball that entire front line and midfield were just looking for runs to make, because they suddenly and finally had a midfielder at the base of that midfield who could actually pass the ball. And Emre Can's a very useful player in very specific situations. Like, he can pass sideways very well, but gosh, the amount of times that last season when the goalkeeper Gregor Kobel would roll the ball out to him and he had someone charging behind him and he would just panic and make a bad pass or completely lose the ball. And we've seen it time and time again. And if Dortmund can basically just swap him out for Pascal Gross, then they're immediately a much better team. not to mention the fact that they've got a lot of great, impressive players. Funnily enough, talking about all these strikers, I was actually most intrigued to see Adeyemi actually plays a number 9 for a change. And I actually thought he did really well, especially with the lead up to I think it was a second goal, which he ended up drawing a penalty for, and Chan scored from the penalty spot. It feels like Sahin knows what to do with these players, where Edin Terzic just did not. It felt like Terzic had his system, and he kind of shoehorned the players into his system against their best intentions, and it kind of worked, and it obviously worked to the extent, or relatively well in the Champions League because they got to the final, obviously, but it just didn't work week to week in the Bundesliga. And I think Sahin's obviously been brought in because he can put together a system that works far better. They look like a far more composed team that can pass it from the back. And as you said, with these new signings, they're definitely going to have more about them going forward. My only concern with Dortmund is that, yes, they're now, a ball-playing, possession-style football team. My only issue is that I don't think they'll be able to do it as well as some of the other clubs. And I still don't think they're as good as Leverkusen. I still don't think they're good as Leipzig. And I still think they'll probably choke every time they play Bayern Munich, as they always do. And so, and that's why I'm tempering my expectation for Dortmund. I do have them 4th. In my predictions, and they've knocked Stuttgart out of the top 4 for me. And part of the other reason for that as well is that I also think Stuttgart will probably struggle to juggle the Bundesliga and the Champions League this season. I think they were really impressive, obviously incredibly impressive last season, and I would still say Sebastian Hoeneß is a better coach than Nuri Sahin. So on paper, I would be surprised if Stuttgart can still grind out a top 4 finish, but I just think Dortmund have had a better season. They've more or less stole Stuttgart's best players as well, so that helps as well. But I think though I'm putting Dortmund 4th, but no higher, just because I think this will still be a transition season. It'll still be a debut season for Nuri Sahin. And the only other thing I want to add as well is that if he is going to stick with that back 3, it does put a huge amount of strain on those 3 central defenders because they don't really have any cover beyond them. I'm not saying that he's married to the back 3 system. I know he's played a back 4 in pre-season in other games, but even if he switches to a back 4, that means he's still only got one backup solid central defender in that team. And then after that, you're basically looking at someone like Emre Can in defence, which I'm sure no Dortmund fan wants to be able to rely on. So I'd be looking to see if they maybe try and pick up another central defender before the window shuts. But yeah, I think top 4 for me, and I'm sure Dortmund fans will be delighted in your hope for them.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about this too is that we're struggling to really place our top 4 though, right? Because Stuttgart is a great example. I saw them this weekend, and my complication is, and this is a good thing. I mean, this is really exciting for this upcoming season, is that there's so many good teams that play good football. Which, the competition, I think, at the top of the table is going to be extremely tight, and there's lots of opportunities for the big clubs to drop points. Is that the Stuttgart side, what really surprised me about the Super Cup matchup is how well in tune they already were. And that I think some of the key players that they have, Enzo Milo comes to mind, who had an incredible game. And he had, of course, a very fascinating summer, right, playing for the French U23 side at the Olympics, which I think is giving him that extra bit of experience that he potentially needs. Angelo Stiller looked like he's going to be ready to make another step forward. I mean, he's going to be in the spotlight this year because with both Gundogan and Kroos retiring in the same summer from the national team, you know that he is going to be slotted in there as one of the successors, right? So he has a big year ahead of him, and Demirovic looked incredible as well, and so did Dennis Undav is Dennis Undav, but Franz Kretzig, he delivered the assist for the Undav lead in that game, And he really gives them another option at left back behind Mittelstadt, who's a little bit of a different player, a little bit more rounded. He can play several positions. He's often been compared to a young Philipp Lahm, right, who also went to Stuttgart on loan before kicking off his career at Bayern Munich, right? And they are very defensive about where they're going to finish up. They're going to be happy with a top 9 finish, and they themselves have said many times that they are worried about playing in the Champions League as well. But I think we might need to be a bit higher on them than many people think. And so if they challenge for that top 4, which I think the top 4 favorites are, without any order, Leverkusen, Bayern, Dortmund, and Leipzig. But if they challenge for that top 4 as well, then that makes things incredibly interesting, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I really struggled to what to do with Stuttgart. In my first kind of draft of the top 4, I actually had them in my top 4 above Dortmund, and then I really thought about it, and I thought, historically speaking, teams who do kind of overachieve in the Bundesliga, who then get into the Champions League, do see some sort of dip. We see it with Frankfurt, we see it with Union Berlin. I don't think Stuttgart will be anywhere near that kind of level, but even when you see the club speaking throughout the summer, they've said themselves, they've tempered expectations. They've said, look, we're just happy with a top 5 finish. We're happy with, if we can get back into Europe. They're hoping to just do what they can in the Champions League. And you also have to bear in mind that this year's Champions League is going to be really grueling. It's like 3 extra games, I think, in the group stage, maybe 4 extra games. And I mean, it's going to make them a lot of money. But I think on the pitch, it will really kind of stretch that squad. And I just kind of think that the teams around them are probably a better place to deal with that. I think Dortmund are a better place to deal with that. As you said, they've more or less got 3, maybe 4 strikers they can pick from this season. DRC wasn't ready, Bayer wasn't ready for the weekend game, so Adeyemi plays up front, and they've got additional firepower, and Daniel Malin, Duranville got a great goal. So there's depth there, which I think was really the key thing that Nuri Sahin was really pushing for in this window, and I'm just not sure Stuttgart have that depth. And actually, talking about depth, I kind of want to maybe move on to Leipzig before maybe we do have to start wrapping this up, because they're equally a club that I think are probably one of the hardest ones to really pin down here, because, as you said, everyone every summer says, wow, Leipzig have got a great squad. Wow, they've got so many impressive young players, and they always beat someone in the Super Cup, and it's like, wow, they're really going to do it this year. And then they always kind of flatter to deceive. But, we talked about Leipzig a few weeks ago on one of the shows, and I still stand by that. I feel like this is the first time since Leipzig really got promoted to the Bundesliga that first team and that first 11 hasn't really been hugely impacted. And I know, obviously, Dani Olmo's been sold, but in my personal opinion, I don't think he's a huge loss. He's a big player when he can play, but he's just not a player that Marco Rose, I think, has really budgeted for the last kind of couple of years, just because of the amount of games he's missed. And he's obviously built his team without Dani Olmo in mind. Of course, he's a great player that could have came in off the bench and etc., but he's not a Josko Guardiol. He's not a Konate and Upamecano. He's not a Christopher Nkunku. He's not the star man that they're scrambling to replace. And this feels like the first time in really perhaps ever, since they're obviously quite a young club, that they go into this new season with basically their squad fully intact and ready to go. And I was actually kind of looking at the players that they brought in, and they brought in an exciting young goalkeeper. They've got a young German central midfielder and Oye Drago with the world at his fingertips, and Antonio Nusa, an exciting winger who scored at the weekend, if I'm not mistaken. And I was kind of thinking, they spent 41 million euros, and that's exactly basically what Bayern had to do. Those are the players that Bayern basically had to go out and sign. And of course, had Bayern gone in for these guys, it would have probably cost 2 or 3 times the same amount. But I just feel like Leipzig have just done everything right this summer, and both in terms of bringing in players and also making sure to keep the key ones. And I'm fully expecting to probably be burnt again by suggesting Leipzig. I mean, I remember this time last year, I think we were picking them for like title contenders, but as we said on the show a few weeks ago, it's this season or really never for Marco Rosa. Whether it's maybe he doesn't even have to challenge for the league. He has to just show that this team and this club are capable of being that. So I've put them second, above Bayern, behind Leverkusen, but I think on paper they probably are one of the few clubs that probably could match Leverkusen. And as we saw last season, those kind of clashes between the two clubs were so tight and so on a knife's edge in terms of the quality of the players and the tactics on show as well. But man for man, I think they've probably got a better squad than Bayern. I think they've got a probably better squad than Dortmund. And I think they've probably got a head coach who can kind of take them to the prospect of challenging for the title this season.
Well, as you said, it has to be now or never, right? I mean, they didn't lose much. Only Dani Olmo, and they added significant pieces. And I think some of the players that ended up staying are all due a step forward. Jesko comes to mind, right? But even Openda. And they have something that Dortmund acquired this summer already. They have two guys that can potentially score 25 goals plus. That's a huge asset. And I think that is something that we have to keep in mind in general. Like, a lot of the clubs in and around Bayern have now several strikers that can score more than 20 goals, right? Even Stuttgart do have that. Undav and Demirovic can both score more than 20 goals in a single Bundesliga campaign. Bayern have one guy who can score over 30, but where are the goals going to come from when he doesn't do that is a huge question. And I think that is a really big factor for Leipzig. I think the one thing that, and I sense that with them, they're very, very, very proud of the achievements that they have. I spent time with them in New York this summer. I'm still working on a few things in terms of content as well. I did the interview with Uwe Traogo, who unfortunately now is injured, right? But who I think is a fascinating prospect, maybe the most talented young player German football has produced in quite some time, and they got him. He can play so many different roles for them. He's listed as a central midfielder on Transfermarkt, but he can play left wing, right wing, attacking midfielder. He's kind of like a Swiss Army knife in that regard and can play so many different roles. And it's going to be fascinating to see where he eventually does end up playing. Nusa is such a great signing as well. Very direct, right? Has been described as the next Jeremy Doku by our colleague Bart Thompson at Transfermarkt. So a really good player as well. The pieces just have to work together. And I think what needs to happen for them to maybe make that next step and get those 15 points that they have missed in the last few years is just to be fully consistent in the Bundesliga. We've seen it internationally. They've shown that they can go deep. They reached the semi-final of the Europa League, right? They reached the semi-final of the Champions League before. Something needs to happen to make that next step. And I guess we just all kind of question whether they can make the next step until they actually do it. Similar to Leverkusen, right? Last year, where we always wondered, like, what needs to happen for them to finally make the next step. And I think consistency is going to be the key in that. And also, this is another aspect I think that's really important. I had the chance to talk to Pavel Pardo and Kakao, this former Stuttgart legends, right, this weekend. And we talked about when Stuttgart won the title last and what it really took for the team, the club to win the title out of nowhere. And they said what happened is, and this is really important when people underestimate this, everyone at the club believed in the common goal. And with what I mean with everyone at the club, I mean down to the greenkeeper, right? There was just this energy that developed where everyone fully believed and committed into that goal. I think the same thing happened at Leverkusen last year. When you talk to people there, you get the same sense. Like, even people who did something like working at the social media team started realizing like this is possible. So everyone kind of just pulled in the same direction to make it happen. And it's probably also why it didn't happen for Bayern Munich last year, because, there was so many politics and so many people pulling in different directions. And I think that is what maybe is the one thing that Leipzig always had like issues with. Like, remember last year, like all of a sudden Max Eberl is gone, right? Everything has to be perfect for them to win the title. And I mean everything, like, and down to the greenkeeper. And I think that is an aspect that people maybe still underestimate. And they might just have that this year because there is no outside noise.
Yeah. And, Leverkusen is a perfect example of that. It's a kind of culture that you have to just make a club. You have to just fabricated out of thin air, and once it's there, it's there. And maybe just to actually wrap up, I realise we haven't even actually really talked about Leverkusen. I know you briefly touched on with the poke about in the Super Cup, but we both have them down to win the league this season. And as you said, it's not an uncommon prediction among the media. And we've talked about them already on the show this summer leading up to the season, and there's just really no fault in them, to be honest with you. They kept their players. Alonso hasn't really indulged in any speculation. In fact, all the speculations just completely disappeared about his future. And the club have just allowed him to spend the money the way he has done over the last 2 or 3 seasons. They've brought in ready-made players who are hungry to win silverware. Guys like, I keep going back to Monteria, and I understand he has had the best start at Leverkusen. But that's the kind of player that will desperately be going into this team and thinking, I know what bar I have to reach, and if I can reach that bar, I get to win a league title as well, or I get to win a Pokal as well. And adding these guys who have that hunger to win titles, it must be so important for Leverkusen, because, I'm not suggesting that complacency is going to sit in, far from it, I'm sure. But I've been so impressed with their transfer window, and it's actually maybe quite telling that we don't really have to say so much about Leverkusen, because it's just so obvious that they've been quite flawless this summer, and they look like the team to beat this season.
The one thing I would maybe say about that is, and this is based on conversations I had this weekend, including with Simon Rolfes, is that I get the sense that they would have liked to have a little bit more turnover in their squad, Stefan. And I think Jeremy Frimpong and Jonathan Tah ending up staying. I mean, the window is still to open for 2 weeks, so let's wait and see, right? But the fact that they're likely to stay kind of handcuffed them into a situation that they didn't really like. I get the sense that they would have actually liked to sell those 2 players and bring in new players that were hungry for success. To create, I said, like, the way Rolfes mentioned it, he said, like, the core has to stay intact. But around that core, you want to sell players and have refreshment, because you need to have players who are hungry to achieve what the players that have left, to achieve that, right? Like, how do you say, a success story creates another. That's how he phrased it. And I thought that's really interesting. And I wonder if they themselves hope for a little bit more turnover. Like, not a lot, just 1 or 2 more guys, right? And then bring in more guys that can sort of, look at what these guys achieved last year. Like, I want to push and make sure that I missed out on the title that last year. I want to feel and live that success, and I'm going to push the guys that have done it already, do it again, right? And I think that is sort of the kind of worry that they have a little bit. I think that because the market is so congested, they weren't maybe necessarily able to do everything they wanted to do.
Yeah, exactly. And 2 examples are obviously Frimpong and Jonathan Tah. I think in both situations they would have been happy to sell to some unsuspecting rich Premier League club, but that hasn't happened. And, obviously the Tah situation has kind of led to Bayern being the only bidders and probably bidding less than Leverkusen are willing to accept. So, yeah, they're stuck with these players, but, at the end of the day, it might not be a great situation for the accountants at Leverkusen, but I'm sure Xabi Alonso will be just fine with it.
Yeah, I'm sure, it will work out fine. As you said, the other pieces that they brought in are quite good. And they still have this uncanny ability to score goals late, to get themselves out of troubling situations. I mean, the Super Cup, I'm not going to lie, I had the entire article written up. And I should really know better, Stefan, by now, that, this is still Leverkusen. And with the last shot on goal, they equalized the game. Ended up winning in penalties. And so they still have that uncanny ability, right, to get themselves out of really tough situations. That Stuttgart team had them. They had them. They were better, and they had them already 11 against 11. And yet they still were able to sneak a win, which is very impressive. But yeah, let's wrap this up. As always, make sure to check out the content that's coming out this week. There's going to be lots. We're going to have 2 more preview shows as well. Stefan, you already mentioned it. You're going to do a piece on Dortmund, the newsletter. and I'm doing mine on VfB Stuttgart. I'm going to look at what they need to do to do one better, essentially, what needs to happen. So that's going to be my newsletter this week. And then, of course, Matt has one as well. So, yeah, lots of content coming your way this week as we getting closer and closer to the Bundesliga season. So, with much ado, nothing, we're going to wrap this up. Until next time, auf Wiedersehen.